Society here in Toronto. And as you know, the 8th of March was Commonwealth Day. Members of my council and myself decided to extend it to Commonwealth Month. We've had one event for each week, and it's been enthusiastic. We've had a wide range of initiatives dealing with from security in the Commonwealth to the Commonwealth Interfaith Day service to a recognition of our Commonwealth essay competition participants and winners with the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, enthusiastic bunch of young students. And here we are with university students and other like-minded individuals who, like anything else in an organization, we want to challenge ourselves to find out what is the best about an organization and what can we improve and how can it be made more relevant and how can we engage as active participants of this institution and of this organization that we all belong to. So the topic today is the modern Commonwealth, a force for good in the world. I'd like to recognize our partners, Philip Murphy, Professor Philip Murphy from the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, London University. We have Justin Patrick, who's the president of the International Association of Political Science Students, and Johnny Liborn, the chair of the Commonwealth Students Association. So as you can tell, it's intellectually rich panel that we will be drawing upon from representatives from the two organizations. It's great to see the students and the university students interested in this discussion. And I'd like to recognize all my colleagues on the Royal Commonwealth Society of Toronto for supporting this initiative. And I will welcome all of you here on behalf of my members of council and look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you very much. And over to our moderator, Philip Murphy, who will go over some highlights.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Colin. And thank you, Andrew, as well, from the Royal Commonwealth Society Toronto. Thank you, Johnny and Justin, who helped put these panels together from the Commonwealth Students Association and the International Association for Political Science Students. We're going to have a kind of a discussion. I don't know how, what a range of opinions we're going to have on the Commonwealth. The title for today's discussion is The Modern Commonwealth, a Force for Good in the World, ? And we'll see whether what our panelists think in their opening statements. I'm going to ask each panelist really just to make a few remarks for about 5 minutes at the beginning. And then I'll try and kind of engage the panelists in a discussion with each other on this theme. In the meantime, as audience members, if you can keep your microphones on mute unless you're actually speaking, and please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions, and we'll feed the questions to the panelists as we go along. Now I can see three panelists. I can see Ganesha, Enrique, I can see Winnie. Do we have Kobe Brumis here? Kobe, are you with us? Hello? Okay.
Phil, I see Philip, I see Kobe Brooms with us.
Okay.
Maybe she's just checking in.
Kobe, hi. Nice to.
Hi.
Nice
I'm having some challenges getting in.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So if I could take you in the following order. So Ganesha first, Enrique, Kobe, and Winnie. Is that all right?
Sounds good.
So if I can ask you to make your opening statements, let me just very briefly introduce the speakers. Ganesha Dewani is the Vice President of the International Association of Political Science Students, and she is the coordinator of their Asia Project events. Enrique Romero is editor-in-chief of the IAPSS's Journal in Latin American Studies. So he has that regional expertise. Kobe Brumes is Vice President of the Barbados Youth Development Council. And Winnie Nyandiga is Vice Chair of the Commonwealth Students Association and regional organizer for East Africa of the 100 Million campaign. So we have a range of regional expertise represented here. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say. Ganesha, can you start off, please? Hi, Ganesha. Over to you.
I'm so sorry I lost the connection. So I'm here. Okay, great. Thank you, Philip, so much. So talking about the contemporary issue that we are talking about with respect to the Commonwealth nations, I think we need to take a step back and realize why we are talking about this issue today, which is very important. And I think the recent development that has been caused across the globe has taught us to think more about these areas. Maybe the development of or the transition from Millennium Development Goals to SDGs, or maybe the regional developments, or the change in the global order, or change in the power shifts in the political scenario. And again, the recent developmental practices being practiced by Commonwealth countries in respect to education and health has brought us to think about how modern is the Commonwealth nation is looking like. And as per research, I think 30% or 60% of people are under 30, or they are kids. So they are like the upcoming generation, those who are coming forward, and they'll be looking forward to new approaches and education within these Commonwealth streams. So this is like a general basic idea why we are here to talk about this. And through this, I would like to jump into different cases and again challenges and the solutions to that, maybe in the later part of this discussion. So yeah, that's the basic detailing from my side, Philip. Thank you.
Philip, you've got to unmute yourself. Philip, you've got to unmute yourself.
Hi, if you just unmute yourself, Enrique.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to say something.
No,
so first of all, I would like to thank everyone for the invitation, particularly Justin, for trusting us to participate in this panel. As you mentioned, I am the editor-in-chief of the IAPSS Journal for Latin America, which is a part of Politicon, which is our main academic journal. And our journal is called El Encuentro Latinoamericano, and it basically offers a possibility for Latin American students to publish their research about issues in the continent, both in Spanish and English. So talking about the Commonwealth, I believe that in the same way as Spain, for example, has the OEI, Organización de Estados Iberoamericanos, the Commonwealth represents an intention of the UK to stay present and make a forum for its former colonies to share expertise, to have a common purpose for development in education and better policies. So it's interesting to see how the dynamics today have turned out in different, there are several of these organizations which are based on a common shared past, in the same way as Spain used to have its former colonies in Latin America. There are a lot of organizations like Fundación Carolina, the OEI, even the OAI, the Organización OEA, sorry, Organización de Estados Americanos, And I believe these forums offer a good opportunity for countries that have cultural and political and historical ties to share expertise on development and create forums for discussions and improvement of policies in the regions. So that'll be my opening statement, and I will be open for any questions that have to do with the Commonwealth's presence in Latin America and in the different countries in the region.
Okay, thank you very much. Kobe, over to you for some opening statements.
All right, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am very interested in having this conversation, given the whole title of this afternoon's conversation, the Modern Commonwealth, a Force for Good, particularly coming from the island of Barbados, being an independent country and still being part of the Commonwealth. As a small island developing state, Barbados has seen the benefits of the Commonwealth. We've seen as a country what it can do for us and how it can help us out as a small island. And I'm pretty sure that the rest of the Caribbean can be able to say the same for that. As we have this conversation this evening, we have to understand what the Commonwealth is as an evolving union of members built on a shared history, building toward a common future, and what the Commonwealth does for, especially speaking particularly for small island developing states, because we talk a lot as SIDS about not being able to be heard globally, but institutions such as the Commonwealth give us the opportunity to facilitate globalization and to be able to go to high-level negotiations and reach consensus through knowledge sharing and transfer of best practices. And for Caribbean, small countries such as those in the Caribbean, those are some of the things that we rely on heavily from the international big players, as we would say in the Commonwealth, to also share that. And the Commonwealth as a research institution, because I think we all can agree that the best decisions are made based on facts, and those facts are often rooted in research. Those facts are often rooted in experience. And as countries who are coming up in the world now looking to punch above our weight, it is critical that we have that research to know that, let's say country A did this did not work out, but country B did this and this worked out. So we can mesh the two experiences together and to be able to succeed. So the Commonwealth as an institution has its benefits to us from the CSA's role, the Commonwealth Students Association's role, is fostering local and regional and global solidarity among students. So I would say, like all institutions, we often have to reach a point in which you look at the institution and you say, okay, we are here now, we're at a crossroads. Where do we go to ensure that we continue to be relevant in the 21st, in the 22nd, in all these centuries? If anything has shown us, 2020 and 2021 has shown us that things can change in the blink of an eye with a pandemic, with anything that can happen. And I think the Commonwealth offers a certain level of stability. And it is for us as young people, is for us here who are discussing to be able to look at the institution and to be able to see where we can improve upon the institution. So those are my opening remarks, and I look forward to having a further conversation.
Thank you very much indeed, Kobe. Winnie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I feel like my colleague has literally done rather articulated the points from the Commonwealth Students Association much better. And I also want to say that I feel like this conversation is timely. And just as to echo my colleague's words, that if it's anything that the pandemic has shown us, then it is, the importance of solidarity. Solidarity has helped us push through this pandemic. And that is one of the things that the Commonwealth advocates for. We're looking at how it is an evolving union of member states that come together to advocate on issues that affect us. For me, I think on my end this time, what I am looking at is the Commonwealth's role as a research institute. And this time more than ever, I know we need see that aspect of it. We are looking at the world moving post-pandemic. We are looking at how vaccines are going to be administered. It's the conversation that is happening right now. And now as member states coming together to put our heads together, the Commonwealth being able to bring us together under one umbrella, then this conversation is very timely. So I'm very excited to be here. Can't wait to see what we'll achieve out of this conversation. I know there are areas that we are that are very strong, though there are gaps that needs to be strengthened, and maybe there are things we need to do away with in the Commonwealth. And I hope this conversation, or rather this debate, brings that out strongly. Thank you.
Okay, that's really helpful, and some very what is so lovely working, you know, having this discussion amongst non-academics is that if you had 4 academics on the panel, they would each have gone on for about 15 minutes. And our panelists have been fantastically concise, and which is great, because we can develop a discussion around that. I want to start off with a question to each of you. What would you say was the kind of the image of the Commonwealth amongst the young people you know? Is it an organization that they know much about? What are they feeling? What is the kind of the gut feeling amongst your friends and contemporaries about the Commonwealth? You're obviously a bit unusual in knowing quite a lot about it, but what about your immediate circle of friends and contemporaries? Ganesha, can I start you with that?
Sure, Philip. So that's a very good question to answer, and I'm really happy to represent that question from both student front as well as from the nation to which I belong, which is India. So talking from the perspective of my country, which is a blend of both people belonging to different castes and class, and there is a quite disparity when it comes to access to education or different services within the country. And the students who are studying over here, they definitely see Commonwealth as one of the prospects for their future. But most of the people, those who are from the socially disadvantaged background, and they are like not well versed economically, are not maybe aware about the Commonwealth nation. I think there has to be a need or a training or a workshop or something like that, which brings them on the forefront to know more about the recent initiatives, the contemporary politics, what is happening in across the nations, and what is the relations between them, what are the regional forces that are working together to bind them. That is one perspective. And the second side, which is from the student perspective, because I work with International Association for Political Science Students, I think there has been a good representation of student communities within those Commonwealth organizations or the regional clubs, I would say. But still there is a tiny gap which we need to fill in with respect to the equal representation when it comes to different continents. So Commonwealth countries clubbing together continent-wise is very important there. And I think different representatives from different continents are working at IAPSS, and it becomes very important to give them a platform where they can have a say with respect to the Commonwealth nation, what they think that their future should look like, be in politics or academics, or maybe in public leadership sort of career. So it's very important to make them also aware. So I think a huge hub of education or maybe knowledge creation or knowledge exchange is required for these sectors. That's my view on that. Thank you so much, Philip, again.
Thank you very much. And Enrique, what do you feel about that?
Well, that most of the people I know, both in Latin America, Spain, they know the Commonwealth for the opportunities it offers to students. Okay. And I think that's a parallelism that that a lot of this foundation is based on common culture, common history, and common language have in common, even if it's redundant. Because what people know the Commonwealth for is basically for the scholarships it offers so that you can study in the UK. And a lot of students believe that this is a good opportunity for them to actually go to the UK get the full right scholarship so that they can afford to study in the best universities. And that's something that other institutions in Spain do as well, so that students in Latin America can also go to Spain to study. And I think this is a really key point for the Commonwealth to legitimate itself for the future. It's basing the work and the academic development of students in all this huge community of English-speaking countries through the possibility of going and studying in the best universities in the world, which are a lot of them are in the UK. So in my most immediate circle, people understand the Commonwealth as an institution that actually allows them to get further academic education and actually getting expertise that they can use both in the UK, in Europe, and in their own country when they go back from having had a master's in LSE or Oxford or Cambridge. And I think this is a good thing, that these organizations are based in knowledge sharing through scholarships and giving the opportunity for people that come from more disadvantaged backgrounds to have the access to better education and therefore better job opportunities.
I think that's a really interesting point, and that the prominence of the Commonwealth Scholarships Commission. Would you say that that's something that tends to speak to a kind of more elite group of young people, the better off, the better educated? What about, for use of a better word, ordinary people, the less well off, the less privileged? Do you feel that they have the same sense of the Commonwealth as something that makes a difference to their lives?
I think these institutions are more or less present in Latin American societies because they also make investments in childcare, early childhood education, education in primary and secondary school, but it's not as visible for people as an institution like UNICEF or the UNDP would be, because they are much more present. They have a different branding, I believe. They feel like they're more focused on primary and early childhood education and secondary education, and that's something everyone can benefit from. It happens the same with the European Africa scholarships, or for example, Fundación Carolina in Spain also offers scholarships for higher education, but there are also partnerships for the improvement of early childhood education or primary education. And I think people don't really recognize it as a fundamental institution for other types of education, which everyone has access for, due to the work of many other organizations that are actually more visible in everyday's, because there's a lot of organizations working in this sense. So I think this positioning, this marketing positioning that other programs of the United Nations and other institutions are doing kind of leave the Commonwealth on a second spot.
Thank you very much. Kobe, what about in Barbados amongst your contemporaries? How is the Commonwealth viewed?
Thanks, Philip, for the question. I must say that the Commonwealth has a big presence in Barbados, given our close history with the UK. There are a number of programs that happen in Barbados that are sponsored by the Commonwealth, and a number of scholarships and those type of things. In my immediate circle, I would say that they are well known or well thought about, but overall in the population, I would say that it is not as popular as it could be, and that may be due to public relations or just overall marketing of what the Commonwealth, the initiatives that the Commonwealth has. But when we look at the type of things that they offer in terms of scholarship and programs and initiatives that they put on in collaboration with different NGOs and other organizations and even governmental organizations, they have a presence here, but it is not sometimes reflected among the general, I would say, youth population as this is what they know a lot about.
And Kobe, I mean, I've had a lot of inquiries from the media over the last year about Barbados's plans to become a republic. And a lot of journalists don't seem to know the difference between the Commonwealth realms and the Commonwealth. They think that Barbados is leaving the Commonwealth, and you have to explain to them that they're different things. But is this feeding into debates about the Commonwealth itself in Barbados, or are they seen as completely different things?
I think you have a certain section of the population that understands the difference between removing the Queen as the head of state and remaining in the Commonwealth. I think the Prime Minister made it abundantly clear that we were not leaving the Commonwealth. Barbados continues to be a great partner in the Commonwealth and continues to benefit from their institution. But at a macro and micro level, I think that there may be still some confusion. Again, public relations and overall knowledge in the population about it, and that's something that I guess will happen a little bit more as we move toward that time frame by November this year of removing the Queen as the head of state. But I think there will be some information going out to the public that may influence some more engagement or some more conversation about the role of the Commonwealth in Barbados.
Okay, thank you very much. Winnie, what about your contemporaries and friends? How do they view the Commonwealth? I think you're still on mute, Winnie. Just got to unmute. That's great.
Sorry, I want to take two approaches in this. The first one would be the young people who are pro-Commonwealth, and it emanates from all these opportunities and the Commonwealth having a track record of empowering young people. We look at it from the youth network that I'm part of, for example, the Commonwealth Students Association, where through local, regional, and global solidarity, we get to push for SDG 4, quality education. But again, you want to look at it from this other side. And I normally call my generation the digital natives, the progressive digital natives. And they would probably see Commonwealth as ineffective. And this one I dare say, having comrades from all over the continent, and we look at the values that the Commonwealth stands on. And in some areas, unfortunately, we've not been able to enforce these values. Look at, for example, what happened in Uganda, election malpractices. We don't see the Commonwealth calling that out. We look at the inequalities that are happening in the world. So this other side of it, that I'm also part of that other side of it, in as much as I am, for the Commonwealth and for the good that it has done, that there is a need for the Commonwealth to go back to its radical tradition. Where that if our values are human rights, then we call out the gaps in human rights. If one of our values is good governance, then we call out the corruption for what it is, in as much as we work with these heads of government, these ministers. So I think that's it for me. It takes both two angles, the ones that are pro it through scholarships, which is a very good thing, through empowering the next generation of leaders in our different countries. But again, on this other side that has so many questions, if you are bringing us together based on these values, why are we getting the shorter end of the stick? I feel like that's the feeling, for example, with young people in Uganda or young people in Zimbabwe, even students who have to be in and out of prison because of calling up the government for its inconsistencies, for its inequalities, for its violation of human rights and democracy. So that's basically it.
That's really powerful and really interesting, and we've been following Uganda very closely here, of course. I want to encourage audience members to use chat to pose questions to the speakers, but I'm gonna while you're doing that, I'm going to go back for another round, okay? With this question, it's really, I'll go straight back to Winnie, okay? You pointed to a big dilemma that the Commonwealth has. It says it's about values, it says it's about democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and yet, you know, some very flawed elections have taken place, and the Commonwealth hasn't apparently done very much about it. You know, the really strong action in Africa in recent years against a Commonwealth country, the Gambia, was launched not by the Commonwealth, but ECOWAS, the regional organization that actually had the power to topple that state. The Commonwealth clearly doesn't have that kind of authority, and it doesn't have that sort of power. So what is the answer if you were kind of to give your diagnosis of how the Commonwealth could be made more effective? What would be your answer if you could talk to Patricia Scotland, the Commonwealth Secretary General, and suggest changes in the organization or how it could be rethought or restructured? What would you recommend? Maybe let's go back to Winnie. I mean, since you raised this issue of it not being very effective, what would your answers be?
Like this is a very tricky question. What do you mean when you say that it is not effective? These are 54 member states voluntarily coming together and even giving Commonwealth the autonomy. I feel like it is, from my opinion and from my observation, I feel like it is maybe lack of goodwill, because there is so much power when it comes with, there is so much power that comes with international solidarity. And I feel like on that end, we are failing. Like, I'll give you an example. What we saw in Uganda, because we are on the ground, we didn't have the international community calling that out. But in area, because social accountability, I'm looking at social accountability. So if I was to speak with Patricia Scotland, it goes down, rather it narrows down to social accountability, because these 54 countries come together and there is a social contract. So people need to be held accountable. So there is a need for us to hold our leaders accountable. You are part of the Commonwealth. One of our shared value, the common future we are looking at, based on shared prosperity, is the adherence to human rights. But you as a country, you're not doing that. So there has to be social accountability, because we are in a social contract. So in my observation, that would be one. So goodwill has to be there. Keeping quiet enables and breeds contempt and makes rogue leaders go get away with so much. So for me, I think social accountability would be the start as we build upon it.
And how do you had this lovely phrase about your generation being digital progressives. How do you harness the power of the internet to do that? Is there a way of doing that?
As you saw, and even during COVID, young people were the first responders in the community. And even when all the international community probably was quiet, when things were happening, let's say in Uganda and Zimbabwe, young people have come together, even in our own way, as Commonwealth Students Association. We have called out the government of Zimbabwe for detaining our comrades simply for speaking out. So young people are using what they have to make sure our voice are heard. And through amplifying our voices, we have seen change happening, even if it is in small ways. Go back to Nigeria, I want to speak of Africa because I'm African. And when there was the NSRS, when police brutality was there, it helped. So what young people are doing, we are using the tools that we have to paint what is happening, or rather to shed a light on what is happening. And young people are doing it. In the continent, for example, the Commonwealth Students Association works with the All African Students Union, which has been very loud, which has been, relentless in calling for solidarity among all the students in the continent to stand with our comrades in Uganda who had trouble, and our comrades in Zimbabwe who had issues. And when need arise, we, through the internet, we came together and we contributed funds to be able to help them with the lawyers in the country, lawyers who still know the importance of upholding human rights.
Thank you very much. Cubby, what about you? What would your message be to Patricia Scotland about how the Commonwealth could be made more effective?
I would have to agree with Vinny in this sense. I think that we need, as young people, this generation in particular, we don't pay a lot of lip service, and I find that sometimes at these high-level meetings, a lot of lip service is paid and is not followed through by a lot of action. And I think that if I were to have a conversation with the Secretary General, that we would want to see more realistic goals and the actions that you're putting in place to achieve them, that they're measurable, that you can come back and say, this is what we stand for. We know exactly what we stand for. We know that if something goes wrong, we know that we can count on the Commonwealth to be there to say, this is wrong, this is right, to make some decisive actions, to make some decisive statements, because we find that sometimes some of these multilateral organizations, everybody's tiptoeing. There's this high, I want to say, well, diplomacy plays a part of it, but to be able to hold people accountable and to be able to see what is actually happening. And that will also come with what I mentioned locally in terms of improved public relations, so that people know exactly what the organization is all about and to be able to be engaged with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Enrique, you made some, I put the same question to you about how it could be made more effective, and you've already made some very interesting comparisons with the Spanish international organizations in this area. Could the Commonwealth learn any lessons from other international organizations to make itself more effective?
I think these organizations have a different nature, as the Commonwealth uses Queen Elizabeth II somehow as the reference, for the union of all the countries, and she's the head of state of many of them. So it's really, there's nothing quite like that for example, in Spain, with other countries in Latin America. Our king, we don't get to choose our head of state either, but he's not the head of state of all the Latin American countries which are part of this organization. But what I find parallel, for example, is that there's always criteria. In the same way the Commonwealth has the Harare Declaration and the London Declaration, there's always criteria to join this sort of organizations, right? For example, in the case of the OEA, Organization of American States, or the OEI, the Organization of Ibero-American States, in none of them, Cuba and Venezuela are part of it. So it has to do with their political regimes, it has to do with their lack of democracy, and it has to do with their political positions. And even they themselves launched their own associations in Latin America, the so-called ALBA, the Alliance for Bolivarian States, right? So I think there should always be criteria on who can join this clubs. And in the same way Zimbabwe was removed from the Commonwealth and later withdrew, I think this criteria should be really strict. And if you want to be part of the Commonwealth Foundation or any other organization, then you should have a political, or even the European Union, you should have, there's always these callings about Hungary and Poland not being democratic enough or giving too much power to the executive. I think those criteria should be very clear and should be made very clear for the members who want to join, but also for the members who are already in the Commonwealth of Nations. And those who don't fulfill them, then they should be either excluded, punished, or sanctioned.
Thank you very much indeed. Finally, back to you, Ganesha, and this, what would your sort of message be about how the Commonwealth could be made more effective?
Sure, Philip. So my answer would be a mixture of certain few key points already mentioned by Vinny and Kobe. So Vinny mentioned about the term of solidarity, which is very important in present world. And Kobe mentioned about the public relations on ground, which is very important. And since present is the age of political disruptions, be it within nations or intra-nations or maybe with different world order. So I think as a student representative or being a youngster, there is a need to provide political education to people, which means the inculcation of political value, say the value about democracy, respecting gender rights or human rights in a broader term, or making social values more important in the crux of all those learning, where the students are learning about different development goals as well as the different development conflicts as well. So the inculcation of development or democratic values is very important. That is number one. And number two is understanding what is the local need of, that how Commonwealth can bridge a gap between the local requirements of student community as well as reaching them or making them or giving them a platform of global community as well. So Commonwealth Club can definitely play a big role in that. They can definitely engage with joint ventures or set up remote hubs maybe for setting up representatives in different nations to understand these local needs, which is very important. And again, making people aware about what is actually Commonwealth is all about and how they can actually participate in the whole policy dialogue in a bigger, platform or a framework. So yes.
Ganesha, I mean, India is the biggest country in the Commonwealth. Most people in the Commonwealth actually live in India. And yet one senses quite an ambivalent feeling towards the Commonwealth, particularly amongst Indian diplomats and senior politicians. A sense that India is now, it's going to be a 21st century superpower. The Commonwealth is perhaps a thing of the past and not particularly important to Indian foreign policy. Is that a feeling that you get, and do you think it's a mistaken approach?
That's a very interesting question. So just to share my previous experiences, so I have been working at British Council previously, and there we used to welcome and sort of, hear about the Commonwealth aspirants and those who you got selected for Commonwealth Fellowship. So we used to hear them about their experiences and their difficulties as well. So when we say that India is representing good people or good amount of big people representing Commonwealth nations or representing different sectors of development, again, I'll bring the focus to that point where there is a gap between the elite class and the people belonging to middle and the lower class as well. So to fulfill that gap, or I think to bridge that gap, there is a need again to be focusing on joint ventures. And there is a fact which is I would like to discuss about with specific to Indian reference. So when we talk about the exchange of education or exchange of diplomats in these Commonwealth nations, so these are basically very extensive exchange, which means that people are traveling or people are going for knowledge exchange or for sharing their experiences from one Commonwealth country, which is India, to say B Commonwealth country to some other country, but they are not aware or they are not under the umbrella of Commonwealth country, if what I mean. So they are not aware about that they are going under the umbrella of Commonwealth countries, but they are visiting extensively just because of bilateral agreements or the relationship that the country share. So the proper understanding is required within the country. And I think India has been growing with a very fast pace when it comes to giving opportunities or, the opportunities that are being given by Commonwealth Club within the country in different sectors, be it in IT, technology, social sciences, or the medical sciences, STEM subjects as well. So it's going good the other way around, but there is still a need to focus or bridge that class gap between different class and the elite and the middle class or the lower class within the nation.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to feed in some questions from the floor now. Colin Sandana has asked the first question. Colin, would you like to ask that directly to the speakers?
Sure. I think when you look at the Commonwealth, it's a fraternity, a feel-good kind of organization. Everybody wants to support one another. Nobody wants to dump on one another. And so when you look across the spectrum, you see human rights violations of many perspectives in various degrees occurring. And we say we are the champion of human rights in the Commonwealth. And I'm not saying that we need punitive measures, really, because, like I said, this is a fraternity. You don't want punitive measures, but yet you want to highlight those issues, like you mentioned, Winnie, about Uganda and Ghana. So those are real issues, but are we afraid to bring them to the fore, to discuss them, I don't like the word sanctions, but to highlight them so that everybody else is aware? And if everybody else is aware, then how do we just still make it a focus? Canada is no saint in this process, the way we treat our Indigenous people. But if somebody was to raise that issue at the Commonwealth, for instance, would we say, listen, you shouldn't be doing that. We are giving you 30% of your revenue to the Commonwealth. I'm just throwing a number out. I think we should restrain and take it back, and don't reprimand us for this. So how do we bring it to the fore? And what are some of the consequences that you see that should be applied in a soft measure, harsh measure, or within that spectrum? I throw it out for some kind of discussion. Thank you.
Winnie, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. Again, just to echo initially what we said is social accountability. You might be surprised, but sometimes it is, I don't know how you look at it, but a small thing like maybe a statement in solidarity and calling out the wrongs that are being there. I mean, you see police brutality as a result of the executive, for example, enforcing rules. You call it out because police brutality is wrong and it is against human rights. But what we have seen is, I see you say it doesn't have really to be punitive, but I feel like to the extreme, why would you want to be associated with a partner that does not share the same values as you?
I mean, I suppose one of the problems is how much authority you give to the Secretary General, for example, in the Commonwealth, to make those sorts of statements. And it seems to me that it's never been entirely clear how much authority Secretary Generals have. And different Secretary Generals have taken different views, really, on how outspoken they could be. I mean, in the past, it's tended to be the Secretary Generals who were former politicians who push the boundaries of what can be said. And those who were civil servants are perhaps more restrained, although I don't quite know where Patricia Scotland would fit inside that. It's partly a question of authority, isn't it? About who actually has the authority to speak out. Winnie, yeah.
Sorry, I agree with you, but a question of authority or not really, Philip, I feel like a right is a right and a wrong is a wrong. Like it is as clear as that.
Yeah.
Again, which also brings me to ask the question, then should we relook the criteria for choosing a Secretary General, for example? And should we again relook the question of autonomy and authority that we give to these people?
Okay.
I think
if I could jump in here, Philip.
Yeah, Kirby, please. Yeah.
I'm thinking Whitney may be seeing it as black and white, but in these types of organizations, we have to look at the politics to put it down to a level, because we have some situations, and I think I read it the other day, where you may have a Secretary General who may be vocal, and then you may, in a situation, one country who may be pulling a lot of the financial burden of the Commonwealth may get offended and say, I'm going to hold back funding. So when you say A, you have to say B. So on one hand, we want the Commonwealth to be more outspoken, but then it is not ingrained in the organizational structure for them to be that open without facing repercussions of people pulling out funding. Because I think that sometimes people look at it as, we may not say anything so that we can get the fees, so that we can continue to put on these programs. Because if we say something, then Canada may pull out their money, and then that leaves us with a big deficit. So I think if we're going to look at it that way, we have to relook the funding model, and to ensure that if it is a case that you're going to go that route, that you have mechanisms to put in place that would prevent countries, in a sense, from deciding that because they don't like a particular stance, they're going to pull away their funding.
Yeah, although it's interesting, isn't it, that if you look at cases where big donors have pulled funding, it's not because the Commonwealth has been outspoken on human rights, quite the reverse. I mean, back in 2013, Canada pulled a lot of funding from the kind of the aid wing of the Commonwealth, the CFTC, precisely because it thought the Commonwealth Secretary General was not being sufficiently outspoken about human rights abuses in Sri Lanka, and was indeed happy to pass on the post of chair in office to the Sri Lankan president. So I think you raise a really interesting point, but it's not entirely clear that sort of funding and the withdrawal of funding, threatened withdrawal of funding, is holding the Commonwealth back from being outspoken on human rights. And I think it's a really interesting point. There's a kind of would the other two speakers like to come in on this issue that Colin raises, or should we go on to other questions? Yeah,
Philip, I'm fine with what Winnie and Kobe concluded.
Okay, well, actually, there's a kind of, Benjamin Fraser has asked a 4-point question, and you can all see it in chat, but it comes down to a really interesting point, which is that I suppose in recent years, the Commonwealth has tended to avoid talking about the British Empire and the legacy of the British Empire. And it kind of likes to pretend that it's bright and shiny and new and has nothing to do with the British Empire. But of course, you know, almost all of its 54 states were former British colonies. So actually in recent years, really in the last year, I was going to say recent years, but only really in the last year, and in the light of the Black Lives Matter protests after the death of George Floyd, more and more people, and particularly young people, have been starting to talk about racism and colonial legacies. And some of the things that Benjamin is talking about here in terms of the demand for reparations, for the return of looted objects, and for debates about, you know, racism in citizenship laws, which you saw in the case of Windrush. Do the panel feel that this is an area where the Commonwealth should be engaging more, or is it wrong to dwell in the past? What do you think? I mean, can I come to Enrique first?
I think that even, I mean, all the colonial powers through the 20th century made a lot of mistakes. Actually, I mean, decolonization for Latin America happened way back in the 1800s. Spain had a really bad move with Western Sahara, for example. But you've seen through in the 20th century that many states, like France, for example, they've tried to reconvert their colonial legacy, changing the name of like from the French Empire to the Union, and then from the Union to the Free Association of Francophone states, and then now it's called the Département d'Outre-mer. So I think these transformations which have been taking place in many countries, and France is a really great example, have somehow masked and washed the colonial path away in a polite manner. In the same way that France also has thousands and thousands of Egyptian antiquities in the Louvre Museum, and the British Museum is pretty much the same. I think that all these transformations from direct colonialism to neo-colonialism have to do a lot with name changing and transformation of institutions in a way that they look more like cooperative institutions, more than that, like direct control of the colonies. So I think he's totally right that many countries have either signed agreements or transformed the institutions in a way that they still have this influence over politics, over the economy as well. And for example, the franc CFA in the widespread currency that it's used in Western Africa, in countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, or a lot of ECOWAS countries, is still printed in France. And the gold reserves and the reserves of money of all these West African countries are still in like the Bank of France. And now it's still called franc. I mean, there's no hiding there. And all these transformations of the political situation in Ivory Coast is really interesting with regards to French colonialism, but we're not going to go there. But I believe that the change of the name is not enough. And I think not even the acknowledgement of the war crimes and annexation. I think a proper process of equality between the countries and a proper system of cooperation for all the countries to work together and avoid this dominance and power relationship needs to happen, and that's going to take a long while until it really happens.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Ganesha, I mean, back in 2017, Shashi Tharoor, the very prominent Congress politician, published a book, Inglorious Empire, about the kind of dreadful effect of the British Empire on India. And Shashi Tharoor made quite a prominent appearance at the Oxford Union, arguing in favor of reparations. Is this something that do you think would interest India, the idea of reparations for colonialism?
So I might not be able to comment on that book because I haven't gone through that. But yeah, I am kind of aware about the knowledge shared in that book. So I think to be agree with what Enrique has mentioned in his comments lately. So I think colonialism has been a big issue, and I will talk about the contemporary issues or the conflicts. I think every country or every other region is actually facing internal conflicts, and these conflicts are not actually internal when it violates human rights or when it violates the actual civil rights in that nature. And I think these internal conflicts actually raises a question mark on the entities of those Commonwealth club or nations, where we see that how the Commonwealth nations are actually respecting those human rights. But on the positive side or on the positive front, when it comes to the Commonwealth nations which are working together to, I would say, to encourage the values, which I previously mentioned in my point, that these values should be always encouraged with respect to all those social aspect or political aspect, or giving or making the students to stand in the forefront, or the policymakers in the forefront to reach to the masses or to the representatives of those government to tell more about these social important values. And other than that, not focusing on the internal conflicts or not focusing on the issues which are actually kind of catalyzing those conflicts, focusing on the value side of the politics or the political development is important. Coming to what Shashi Tharoor has been, reimagining the status of Commonwealth nation and specifically the British time rule within India has actually been changed. You can see a huge amount of Indians being a part of these Commonwealth scholarships of, finding a way to Commonwealth club or nations ahead. So there has been a lot of change, and there has been a seeking shift from approach of, towards moving towards education and knowledge sharing, which is very important. So there has been a shift from just not thinking about the political power or not thinking about the economy, but also thinking about the sectors which are more important for social development. So with this point, I would like to conclude on this.
Thank you very much. Kubi, the issue of colonial legacy issues and reparations, very strong in the West Indies. What are your feelings about it?
Extremely strong, and I think that may be one of the reasons, and we spoke a little bit about it earlier when we were talking about the distinguishing between Britain as the colony or the UK as the country and the Commonwealth. And I think that when people sometimes hear the Commonwealth, and because it's made up of majority ex-colonies of Britain, that there is a certain level of I want to say connotation, and as I spoke about, really improving on the public relations. But we also have a situation where in Barbados, we are now already coming to terms with our colonial past. As you mentioned earlier, Philip, we are removing the Queen as our head of state at the end of this year by our 55th year of independence. We've removed a statue this year of Lord Nelson. We are basically reconciling, we're renaming Queen's Park to make it a more cultural, diverse space, and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, all of those things. But I think that Benjamin raised the point where he made where in his question, where we're speaking about looking at these things, and especially in light of the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our economies and on our abilities to produce, and on our abilities even in terms of getting vaccines, to be able to come together as a bloc and negotiate, because we've been kind of handicapped because of the situation that we were putting from our colonial past. And I think that as young people, if we see the Commonwealth, and because of the, let me just go back and say the ties that people automatically assume with the Commonwealth and the UK, that they're looking for some level of acknowledgement, because I saw Benjamin put there that essentially, I think it was a former Prime Minister of Britain went to Jamaica and basically said, reparations? What reparations? So essentially you have to look at the acknowledgement and the follow through that something was wrong with what happened, and to be able then to put us on a path to ensure that we're not, because we started about 10, or I would say probably about 100 blocks behind where Britain and some of the bigger countries are. So I think that also comes because of those types of conversations and where we are now. That is something that we would have to discuss as a region, and at a Commonwealth level, to be able to reconcile what has happened before and how it has had an impact on, especially us Caribbean as small island developing states, and to see where the Commonwealth can support us to be able to raise and to be able to play on a level playing field.
Thank you very much indeed. We could carry on with this discussion all evening, but we've only scheduled an hour for it, and we're pretty much over time now. So I'm going to give the final word to Winnie on this issue of reparations. What are your feelings, Winnie?
To be honest, it's very hard to speak about the Commonwealth without acknowledging our colonial past. For us even to move forward, because there is conversation, move forward, no reparations, move forward, we have to acknowledge it, because it leaves a very bad connotation when it comes to the Commonwealth. And as much as, yes, we agree that the Commonwealth is much more than the UK, and it's bringing all these different member states as equal partners. But again, I also want to ask this question, even just pose a question that really don't have to answer, that we have to ponder about. Looking at most of the Commonwealth countries being majority non-white, is this where even when you look at its leadership and the monarchy, that needs to be aligned with the progression around the world? Is it at this point that we need to bring in the conversation of rotational leadership when it comes to the Commonwealth? Then probably with that, then we can maybe see so much change. I want to say there is so much opportunity with the Commonwealth. We need to explore that potential.
Thank you very much indeed. I have to kind of move on to my second Zoom conference of the evening, but it's been a delight. It's been a real delight hosting this. 4 fantastic speakers, full of really powerful ideas, and it shows you what the internet can do to connect people around the Commonwealth and have these kind of debates that really haven't been possible in the past without, you know, a lot of money. So thank you all very much to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us. And this is one of a number of joint organizations the Institute of Commonwealth Studies is hosting with the Royal Commonwealth Society of Toronto. Thank you all very much, and I hope we'll see you again very soon. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
It's been great, really
Bye
great to see you.
bye. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Henry. Bye, Jenny.
Bye.
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 Thanks, Justin. Were you able to live stream it in the end, or?
No, we had some issues, but we can share the recording afterwards.
Okay. Who should I share it with?
You can send it to my email and I can make sure it's shared and everything.
Okay. Apologies for that.
It's all good.
Okay. Bye-bye.